Thank you for joining us in Finding God in Video Games. In today's Rewind, we're taking a look back at a very specific, very critical title for our gamers such as myself, and maybe for many of us in ways that we may not be aware of, the original Deus Ex. And over time, there's been a handful of games that have attempted to take on the cyberpunk genre, including a game called Cyberpunk, in both gaming and non-interactive entertainment forums. But very few have actually nailed it and gotten it right. But you've got here Deus Ex franchise with all of that tech noir that befits its futuristic setting. I mean, you got the long black trench coats, you got cybernetic implants that reduce the world to almost an equation, you got sunglasses at night so you keep track of the visions in your eyes, which if you got that reference, then you're about my age. You have corporations that are bent on owning the future through technology, and our protagonist typically has a very difficult decision in these types of stories, and especially in the Deus Ex game. Should they slowly give themselves over to the very technology that they're fighting against in order to compete with those who would use that same technology to control the world? As the hero character in the Deus Ex game, the inevitable choice was to place our body on the altar of sacrifice over and over again so we would have an easier path through the game. But by doing that, removing the humanity from the character and slowly making them more machine than human. Faster, stronger, smarter, with new skills after each one of these augmentation upgrades. We spend the majority of our experience in the game becoming the very thing that we're at war with. A world where the line between machines and humans have blurred so fully that those who control the machines control all of mankind as well. These dystopian futures resemble our real world more and more all the time as our hyper-dependence on technology becomes more pronounced with each passing year. But while we become more advanced with our toys and our tech, the core issue of humanity remains intact. And the struggle at the heart of the questions that were asked by Deus Ex have stood for thousands of years and are still relevant to us today. As each pound of the lead character's flesh was replaced by yet another piece of technology to improve them, the question became, who is this character really? A man with the abilities of a machine, or a machine that wears the face of a man? And how close is he becoming to what he hates in order to destroy it? I compare this to a question I've had to ask myself time and time again regarding being a believer in Christ and my relationship with the world. Like that example, in order for me to be effective in my mission, I do have to engage in the culture that I live in and be active within it to make an impact. But how close is too close? And more to the point for us, how do we juggle being both saved from the world and still be a functioning part of it? Are we simply one foot out the door waiting for eternity? Or are we on the other end of the pendulum? We're so completely intertwined with the world that we can't tell the difference. How do we balance being in the world but not of the world? I've battled for much of my Christian life to find the appropriate balance here. And honestly, legalism lies on one side of that equation, and anarchy is on the other. And the fate of the world rests on each of us to find the narrow path in between. So to start, I've always found Paul's dissertation on how he viewed evangelism pretty enlightening. In 1 Corinthians 9, he talks about that he became as a Jew to reach the Jews, as one under the law to reach those under the law, as one without the law to reach those without the law, although he does point out he is still individually under the law of Christ. To the weak, he approached them as one who was also weak. Now that text has been taken to a lot of extremes, so we have to be cautious not to extrapolate it beyond his governing point. This is not a license to become as worldly as we want in order to reach the world. In 1 Peter 4, the Bible makes it clear that we no longer run with the world the way that we did in the past before our conversion. As a matter of fact, it's specifically pointed out that some of our former best friends forever will actually think it's strange that we're no longer dancing along to the same beat. The temptation for me, and I believe for many of us, is to try to find or create a universal doctrine that makes all of us comfortable. And this is a large source of the denominational rifts that plague us to this day. The early church grappled with this exact issue when they were trying to integrate new Gentile believers into the Jewish believing community in Acts 15. So let's turn to the words of Christ to find the initial place where this concept was introduced and uncover the answers we seek. Jesus' prayer for his disciples, which is found in John 17, is where we derive much of this in the world but not of it concept. And Jesus lines out 4 very specific points. We are not of the world, just as he was not of the world. Because of this, the world hates us as it hated him. We are sent into the world, just as he was sent into the world. And he prayed that we would not be removed from the world, but simply be kept from Satan. There's a lot to unpack there, more than we have time to today. And as usual, Jesus himself supplies an example of how to follow him. And before someone raises their hand and suggests this was a prayer for only those 12 disciples, let's just point out that in verse 20, Jesus plainly states that this prayer is not for the disciples alone, but for all who would believe in him. So we're all in this together. So first and foremost, our conflict with this present world system is not due to our difference in beliefs, but our difference in citizenship. And it's critical we see this as the root cause issue. Jesus was born into this planet, but he still stated that he was not of it. And it's easy to argue right and wrong and split hairs on morality issues, and through these divisions, we can create artificial and usually unproductive conflict. But the nature of the issue is not merely a moral dilemma, but at a subatomic level, it is a spiritual one. We do not have to look for a way to be different. Once we choose to follow Christ, we already are. And we cannot expect this world system to understand or follow the laws and tenets of this new kingdom that we belong to, or be surprised when they don't. We can also see that Jesus is not advocating for us to bury our heads in the sand or flee to some commune to keep ourselves clean from the world. We see through the examples of Paul, Peter, and Christ himself that we must be active in this world that we are in. So we are in a position to share biblical truth, provide prayer, and set free those who are in bondage. And our refusal to accept and participate in the world system will draw the ire of those who are still held in its sway, and will probably fall to some of the same illogical and rabid hate that ultimately put Christ on his cross. This wasn't because Jesus was picketing against Roman soldiers, or because he chose to make provocative statements simply to offend the Roman overlords. He simply refused to conform to or participate in the sin around him, in whatever form it existed. And when he spoke, he never compromised the truth for the sake of his audience. To present himself as a sacrifice for us, Jesus became sin, not a sinner. That's a very critical difference. So what's the resolution? I suppose if we want to determine what manner of life we should live, we should fully understand what our mission is. Christ's mission was to seek and save the lost, and he became what his mission to earth required. He had to become a human, specifically a Jew from the lineage of David, a perfect sacrifice and an offering. Our mission, as defined in Mark 16, is to go into all the world, preach the good news to every creature. To reach every creature in all the world will require each of us to do our part in the Great Commission, and we each have a different role. This requires a very personal relationship with Christ, and to determine what job we take and where we choose to live, down to the hobbies we pursue and the daily choices we make, will be unique and individualized. When viewed from the lens of our actual mission on this planet, much of our questions become clear, and through our daily prayer life, the Spirit of God will guide us through the choices we make. We will each be led in different directions because we all have unique callings and individually designed moments of destiny each day that require us to be in a specific place and time to pray with, protect, comfort, or share faith with those in need. To achieve our destinies as individuals, some of us will be in this world as athletes and sports players. Some of us will be authors, some of us teachers, doctors, retail workers. These roles do not define us. They place us in a position we're needed to be in, like a chess piece on the board. You know, chess pieces have unique movements to fit their role in the greater scheme, and by faithfully performing their positions within the confines of their rules for that specific piece, they set up a skilled chess player for success. It would not be appropriate for a rook to move like a knight, and a bishop should never be jealous or critical of the king simply because of the limitations of movement of one versus another. We are all in this world as unique pieces of the playing board, and the game is to save souls. It's the responsibility we each carry to determine what the expectations of the Lord has placed on us to fulfill His grand plan. Some of those may limit the choices we're permitted to make, not because of legalistic rules, but because your mission compels you to be where you are, performing your role in a way that would not distract you or others from your true purpose. There's not a one-size-fits-all solution. Much like our original point of discussion from Deus Ex. The same Spirit of God who called John the Baptist to a monastic life in the desert placed Jesus right in the very heart of Judea. Paul was called to a life of celibacy to best facilitate his missionary calling, while Philip the Evangelist, he was able to serve with a family full of children. Key differences abound, but they were all unified in that they were living their lives in a manner consistent with their message, their calling, and their mission. So I guess as we kind of sum it up, it's appropriate to land on what Jesus defined as the ultimate rule for how to be in the world, but not of it, in Matthew 22, when He gave us the first and great commandment. Love the Lord with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and great commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and prophets.